Thank you, everyone. So I'm glad to be here. This is a lot different than when I was here at Pace. Just a little bit of background on me. I got a BBA in Labor Management Relations, and then a few years later came back for a master's degree in Financial Management. And when I was in that class, I was working in the mutual fund industry. And for my final project, I developed some software that did analysis of mutual funds at that time, a very specific type of analysis. And what I realized was that this was a need in the industry. And so I launched a company to start selling that software into the financial services industry. Got me a lot of attention in the press. I wound up getting a phone call from somebody at an information company, wanted to do a deal with me on my software. I wound up going to work for them, and that completely changed my career. And that put me into a career in technology and information companies, and strategy and innovation, specifically for companies that were developing solutions for the financial services industry, because I had background in the financial services industry. So let me get this started. So that's a little bit of context on what this presentation is coming to you from. Everything in here is very summarized, okay? Bruce asked me a bunch of questions, and we could take a whole curriculum, a semester on covering all this stuff. And so what I decided to do, since you guys are seniors, is put together something for you that you could take away. Instead of telling you stories about how I did things and what I did and how, they went and all of that, I put together what I think will be useful to you as a takeaway and something that you could potentially refer back to if you wind up doing this kind of work. So questions and dialogue are welcome along the way. And so these are some of the subjects that Bruce asked me to cover, and I kind of broke those down into 3 separate categories. So I'm going to cover 3 sections in the presentation. The first one is about a framework for driving systematic strategy and innovation, and that goes with the whole concept of being repeatable, right? You have to have a system to do it. Not everybody does. Then I'm going to cover a brief case study. It's going to show you, I'll talk about what I did, give you some examples of how I did it, so you sort of get these ideas of how do you look at a business and how do you look at an industry to figure out what you can do more in that industry to drive more revenue for your company and deliver new value to the customers. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about structuring your business and your team for success. Because when you're doing something new in a company, that can create a lot of tensions with people. Some people are more involved than others or involved in certain things, and I'll talk about that more in detail. So the first thing I wanted to cover here is this concept of an S-curve. This is something that's used to illustrate the life cycle of a company or a product. And you can see you start, you grow, you start attracting competitors, and eventually you reach a point where the business is mature. Your revenue has topped out. Maybe it's even declining. That's what happens there in the red underneath the other window. And then your question now is, what do you do now? So you don't want to get to that point, obviously. You want to keep growing. And so what you do now is you reinvent. And this is 2 S-curves now, one laying on top of the other. And what you can see here is the green line is, that's a place where this business realized that, like almost every other business, they were going to have a life cycle. They wanted to continue to grow. They wanted to expand their offerings and increase their market share or market size. And so they start doing discovery and looking for opportunities to launch new solutions. And the objective of this is that your new product is going to scale up as your old product peaks out. And when the green line crosses over the blue line at the top, now it's referred to as you're jumping, right? Your revenue is now being driven and your growth is now being driven by this new solution and service. So it all starts there on the left at discovery. Discovery is sometimes a very difficult thing. When you're developing new products and doing innovation, it's referred to as the fuzzy front end of new product development. And the reason it's fuzzy is because it's very often not completely structured. It's not linear. There's a lot of iteration and a lot of refinement. People are acquiring new knowledge, new information, new expertise. There's a lot of kind of moving around and spinning of wheels there that takes place until you reach a point where you're comfortable that you've got something that you could take forward. And this part of the process is also very cross-functional. If you're doing innovation, you need to be able to reach into pretty much any division of the company, any function of the company. And that's also boundaryless. That means that if you're charged with doing innovation and discovering new opportunities, you have to be able to talk to everyone in the company to get feedback and information and subject matter expertise, all the way up to the CEO. Companies have a very difficult time doing this. And there's lots of struggling that takes place with this. So what I've done for most of my career, last 20 or more years, is focus that lens and try to take the fuzziness out of it. And you do that by setting a structure or framework that gives people goals and aspirations and establishes expectations for what it is you're going to do when you're looking for new opportunities. And what are you going to deliver to your bosses that they can use to look at and say, okay, this is a good idea. And what you do, you're making this process now consistent. You're making it very objective. A lot of times, believe it or not, it's not. You're making it measurable, and very importantly, you're making it comparable. So if you have more than one opportunity, how do you know which one is the one that you want to launch? And you do that with a structure and a toolkit, and I'll show you some of that. Of course, when you're doing new things, you always have to be very flexible. Be prepared to pivot, tack, whatever, change direction, because you're doing something new. You're learning a lot of new things. And your course and your direction at the beginning is not a fixed one yet, right? You're still trying to figure out where to go. Any questions? Okay. Any questions online?
No.
This is my first talk ever with a mask, and it is more difficult than I expected. Okay, so at the beginning of discovery, you're looking for ideas. The best place to get ideas is from customers, right? You're selling them a solution, a product, whatever it is. They're the best ones to get feedback from, and very often they're going to be the ones who will say, gee, I get this from you, but I sure wish you did this other thing over here. And I'm going to talk more about that. And so the priority here is a very deep understanding of your customers, what they do and how they work. And you have to ask a bunch of questions. Over time, you figure out some of the questions to ask, and I'm going to cover some of those. And your objective is to discover unmet or unrealized needs in the market. Because when people have needs that are unmet, or from talking to somebody, you realize that there's something maybe that they haven't even thought of, that's a business opportunity that you could potentially monetize. So it's something that's impactful for your customers and also impactful for your business. Ideas come from other places, especially employees who have contact with the customer. They could be customer success managers or customer support people. You can look to other markets for ideas that could be a similar type of market, but a different industry. And of course, there's a lot of research and analysis that goes into this. It could be primary research, which is like a customer interview, or secondary research. And this is a set of bullet points of what goes into your framework, right? You want to identify opportunities. You want to understand what the benefit is of those opportunities to your company and to the customers. You want to be able to evaluate those opportunities. You need to be able to assess your company's skills. If you're going into doing something new, your team in your company may have the skills that it takes to pull that off, but they may not. They might need a different kind of expertise, different kind of knowledge. And if your company is going to decide to get into a new type of business or launch a new product, you've got to have those skills. So I'll talk a little bit more about the assessment as well. Assess the risks. There are different ways that you can make money. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then ultimately at the end, you want to be able to select an investment. Sorry. So this is another way of looking at those bullet points. This is a process for systematic innovation, and it's a playbook to take you from discovering an idea to monetizing that, meaning bringing it to market and driving revenue off of that. It starts with the discover phase. I've talked about that a little bit. Then you're going to go into a process where you select from the ideas which ones you want to move to the next phase. You get into the plan phase, and that's where you build your business case. And everything that you did at the front end is going to wind up going into that business case. Because in the business case, you're doing two things. You are making the case for your company. You're giving them recommendation that they should be investing in doing something new. You're outlining what that is. You're telling them what the business plan is. You're telling them why the customers need it. And you're telling them how you're going to make money off it. But at the same time, as much as that's the plan for your business, the other side of that coin is what are the value propositions for your customer? So the same information that you're going to use to drive your own company to invest in something is the information that you're going to use to sell your product or service out into the market. If it's worth it for you to invest, it's going to be worth it for somebody to buy, and vice versa. And then you go into an implementation phase where you start building and launching. And I blew out here the some of the subjects under discover, because in this process, and the way I do it, it's very heavily front loaded. You're doing a lot of work up front. You want to understand what's happening in the market, trying to discover those unmet and unrealized customer needs. You want to look at who else is in this market, right? Are they competitors? Are they potential partners? What do they do? How do they make money? And ultimately, you get to this part where you start coming up with ideas for what your company and business can do, and ways you could help the customers. And then you have to do this capability assessment, because if your idea is to launch some new kind of technology, but you don't work in a company that does technology, that might not be the best idea for you. Okay, there might be other strategies to go after, or you might decide, well, there's some other idea. It's not as lucrative, but it's something we can actually do versus something that's not really feasible for us. And underlying all of this is a toolkit. And it's got a set of expected analysis, quantitative and qualitative, that's looking at every one of these factors in the market. Who's doing what with whom, right? What's the size of the market? How much revenue can this generate? What do the competitors look like? How do we rate them? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And all of that goes into your business case with different types of visualizations that you use. And I'll show you an example of that. Wow. There you go, right? Okay, somebody's going to invent a mask that actually delivers oxygen. All right, so there's an innovation. Okay, anybody have any questions about this?
Online, can you just say something so we know you're there?
How do you go about determining whether a product or service you put is worthwhile enough?
That's a great question, right? So if the question for anybody who didn't hear it was, how do you decide something that you discover early on is whether or not that's something you want to keep looking into, right? So it's part of your market research. A lot of what you're doing in these situations is early testing. So when you're doing those customer interviews and you go back a couple of times and you get an idea, you can present that as a question to the customers and ask them, if we did something like this, or if we could do something that delivered this to you, what would you think? How important would it be to you? How valuable would that be to your company, right? The most important thing is that feedback from the marketplace. Is it something that people want? If it's not, then clearly you don't want to put a lot of effort into it. If it is, it's the type of thing that you're going to want to keep pursuing. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. Going
Yep.
So when you start doing another study so that the company can go to maturity.
Yep.
And so it becomes something. When you start doing another innovation, do you keep innovating or do you wait for a lull to begin and then go?
Okay. Yep. So for anybody who didn't hear online, the question was when you're looking at the S curve, do you just basically start with one or do you keep looking for other opportunities? So ideally, you're looking for multiple opportunities. And you may only be selecting one, but you could also select more than one and basically just have more of these curves, right? Basically representing different products going across the blue part of the curve because you're developing a portfolio of different potential solutions. You're taking them to market. Maybe you think 2 or 3 of them are great ideas. You have the resources to go after all of them, and you could possibly do that. There's no reason not to. For most companies, especially the larger companies, they are very focused on doing exactly that. They're trying to develop a portfolio of innovation ideas so that they can constantly keep bringing something new to market. You don't only just want to keep going like one after the other. If you can have multiple opportunities going at the same time, you know, that's a great way to just keep growing your business and really expand it. Sure. So I'm going to go on from here and just talk a little bit about a case study. And I'll set the scene for you here. This is one of the tools that you use when you're doing evaluation. This is called a value chain. And each one of these chevrons is a portion of the customer's business, things that they do to drive value and extract value from the market. So here they create a product, they distribute a product, they promote a product, they sell a product, and they service the product and the customer. Sounds like probably every company you could imagine. That's what they do. In this case, this is a financial services company. And for purposes of this discussion, our business is operating in that green box, the green chevron. We're processing the transactions between the buyers and the sellers. Okay, so when a product gets sold, it goes through a specific type of system. We process that transaction and the money changes hands. The customer gets an investment product and the investment company receives the customer's investment dollars. So we're processing those transactions and we're looking for new opportunities to grow this business. And in this case, from prior knowledge, the decision was made not to try to expand the transaction processing business because we had a very large market share and there's only so much you can do in terms of data processing for transactions. So we made this decision to expand our reach across the customer's value chain. And that means we're going to try to do business with this customer in other parts of their company. We'll keep processing the transactions, but is there something we can do to help them create the product, distribute the product, promote the product, service the product, or take care of this regulatory compliance that they have to deal with all the way throughout their value chain? So that's the challenge for us. And in order to get that started, so this comes about from a conversation with customers. Part of this process is we're asking customers, well, you execute these transactions through us. What are the relationships between the parties to the transaction? Right? We know there's an investor. We know there's a distributor. We know there's a product manufacturer. Who else is in this process? So here you can see there's banks, there's consultants, there are others. And this is a very good visualization for you to have when you're figuring out who you're doing business with, what more you could do with them, and who else you could do business with. For example, we could look at this and say, well, maybe there's a way we could do business with those consultants. That's a new market for us. And so you get this kind of view from this. And I really want to emphasize this idea of a transaction. Everything is a transaction. Can you guys think of anything that you do today, maybe on a daily basis, you enter into a transaction where you're exchanging something with a company, but it involves no money? Time, okay, yes, you do. That's part of this, the specific idea I have. every day that you're on social media, whichever one it is, you are receiving a product for free. They're not charging you for that. And in exchange, what you're giving back is access to your personal information and information about your behavior on this social network. They take that and they monetize it into obviously very, very large and attention-getting companies. Okay, but that is a transaction. You are exchanging for something, right? You get this platform, it lets you communicate with people, stay in touch with family, friends, all of that, but you're giving something up in order to get something in return. And they could charge you a transaction fee, right? Or not a transaction fee, a subscription fee. If you want to use our platform, you have to pay, let's say, $19.95 a month or a year, whatever it is. But they have determined that it is much more lucrative for them to get your data and your information and monetize that and give you the product that gives them all that information for free. So everything is a transaction. As you go into business, if you're doing strategy, you're doing innovation, it's a great way to think of everything that your company does. Okay, so I spoke earlier about doing customer interviews. This is another part of it. We're trying to understand this customer. We're getting information about their value chain, and we're focused here on the create, distribute, and promote part. And we're asking the customer, what do you do to create, distribute, and promote products? This is something that's going to go into your interview when you're talking with customers. Well, what they're telling you here is these chevrons down at the bottom, they need information. They have to stay informed about the market, what's happening in the market. They need to monitor their own performance, right? That's getting their own data and figuring out how well they're doing and how much business they're doing and who they're doing business with and where in the country. And they need to benchmark their business, which means they need to compare it to other companies in their industry so that they can know, are they doing well or not, right? They don't know. You don't know how well you're doing unless you have data to compare to others. And what they do with that information is make a lot of very important decisions. How are they promoting their product? Who are they promoting it through? What kind of business relationships do they have? Are products in one part of the country selling better than in another part of the country, or different product types, lots of demographics that go into it. So they need a lot of information here in order to drive this whole create, distribute, and promote part. And they need that same information for regulatory purposes, because some of it has to get turned around to the regulators to understand who's doing what, make sure people are complying with different types of rules, especially that are related to the sale of investment products. So they've also told us where they're getting existing information. So that's down here. These are the companies they do business with to get the information they need. So we've got a handful of companies up here. Only one of them is helping the customer in two different parts of this process, right? The stay informed and the monitor performance. There are other companies here, and they're getting from these companies and their own internal systems, market intelligence, relationship analysis, like we looked at before, sales demographics, and regulatory reporting. So we go back and we look at our transaction data, and we have a lot of data that comes with every transaction, not just about the two particular companies that are transacting, but other parties to the transaction, like the buyer, who is their bank, right? Who is their financial advisor? Are there consultants on either side of this business? What specific product are they buying? And there could be a whole host of other parties that are involved. And what we found here, except for the gray box, is that we have a lot of data that these companies could potentially make use of. And how do we do that? Well, you aggregate that data and put it into an analytics platform, and now you can drive out of it this aggregated market intelligence, right? We know how big the market is. We know how this company is doing. We know how every other company is doing. We know by the type of product, by specific product, by geographic location, and we're able to give them all of this information about who's doing what with whom. And from this, because it's so big, we've established a new standard for industry information, because we're processing these transactions, and we've opened up this data and driving a lot of market info. So can you guys think of any companies that you might hear about, like in the news, specifically related to economic activity, that is that's being referred to for information about employment numbers, right? Employment statistics. Okay, go ahead. Okay, yes, that's a government source, absolutely. But what I'm thinking of is ADP. Does everybody know ADP? ADP processes a huge amount of payrolls, right, for many companies all over the country. And by aggregating that data, it's not 100% complete. It's not the entire market. It's not everyone. But by aggregating that data and reporting statistics off of that data, they have become a standard for obtaining information about the employment market, how it's doing, up, down, unemployment, and things like that. So another sort of concept for you to keep in mind as you're going through this, if you're working with data, these are some of the things that you can do with it and some of the sort of side benefits that your company can gain. Because when this was developed and we started putting out reports about what was happening in this industry, no one had seen those before. And so this is the outcome here at the bottom, okay? We're now in the green box. We're delivering the market intelligence, the benchmarking information, the relationship analysis, the sales demographics, the regulatory information, and more to all the players in this market with more detail than they had before, more analytics, more intelligence. We made it more accessible, and it's more timely because we're processing transactions on a daily basis and turning that information around on an online platform. Okay, strategy class. This is a strategy class, right? So you guys tell me, give me some ideas. What do you think? What kind of strategic value does this bring to our business, the one that we've been in here processing these transactions and now expanding across the customer's value chain? Any ideas? Okay. Well, we did extend our reach across the value chain. Very valuable for this company. Why? It makes for a stronger customer relationship, right? The customer's doing more with us. They're also spending more money with us. Before they were spending that money in different places. Now it's coming to us. So we've increased our share of their wallet. We took this data. Very often it's referred to as data exhaust. It's just a byproduct of the process that you're doing for the customers. We took this data and we've unlocked tremendous amount of value from this data that previously no one was doing anything with. We've also potentially shifted the center of value for this business, just like Facebook, giving away the product for free because the data is more valuable. In this case, is it possible that the market intelligence that we drive and sell to these customers is actually more valuable to them in driving their decisions and selling product than the processing of the transactions themselves? Okay. We've changed the model, the revenue model. Before we were paid by transaction processing. Now we're selling information, and that's being sold on a subscription basis. So now we have annual recurring revenue coming off of subscriptions to an information service, whereas before we were just processing transactions. Does that sound good? That sounds pretty meaningful, right? Questions? Okay. So Bruce had asked me some questions about structure. How do you work through a bureaucracy in a big company? What about corporate politics? And so when you're doing this type of thing, as you could tell, this was pretty big change, right? So this is change with a capital C. It requires a lot of new thinking, a lot of new competencies in the company. People needed to develop new capabilities, and we needed new resources. That makes people very, very uncomfortable. And so in order to go, if you go through this entire process and you actually come up with ideas, right, you want to eliminate as much internal friction as possible. And that's why I got the oars there in the background. Get everyone rowing in the same direction. It will never be 100%, but you want to try and do that as much as possible. So here are some things to think about, right? For your staff, what's the risk and the reward? People have bonuses. They get performance evaluations. They have jobs to do. And now you're coming in because you have this great new business idea for the company and you need them to do something to make this work. And their first question is, how is that going to impact me? I got to spend all my time doing my job. You're asking me to do this great new thing, which is really exciting. But I need to know, is that going to impact my bonus? Is my boss going to come back to me at the end of the year and say I didn't accomplish certain goals, but it was because I was doing this other thing? So these kind of things need to be addressed up front as much as possible. It eliminates these sort of disincentives for people to stop working, and it eliminates competing interests. Another issue is structure of a business. A lot of big companies now work in what's called a matrix managed environment. And that's where you get a department like IT. They act as a service provider to every other division of the company. IT services and all of those other divisions or functions in the company are customers of theirs. And now you're coming in and you're maybe, again, taking time away from them and the customers that they're currently working with. And that person has a boss. He's serving his customers. You're not maybe his customer. Maybe he doesn't think of you as his customer. And so now, who's he reporting to? Does he report to his boss? He has multiple reporting responsibilities to the other customers that he serves in the business. And now you're another person. And so you get these sort of competing responsibilities and sort of competing reporting structure. People often don't know, well, who do I report to? You're asking me to do this. He's asking me to do that. Someone else is asking me to do something else. So again, ideally, you work all this out in advance. Another challenge is you're investing to get a return on investment. But in order to have an ROI, you have to have an I. And sometimes people want to drive something new, but not necessarily make the investment that is called for or that is needed. That might even be possible to build something. But there's so much more to driving and developing a business than just building a product, like taking it to market, doing marketing, doing sales, supporting, servicing. And so all of that has to be part of your business case. And if someone comes to you when you're doing a project like this, they say, well, I know the business case said this. And for example, we approved hiring 3 salespeople to take this product out and sell it. But instead of doing that, we want to use our customer service team to mention this to customers and try to sell it. Do you think that's going to be as successful as having salespeople? Probably not. Customer service people support the customer. They not necessarily really know how to sell. So it's fine if somebody wants to do that, if they're the decision maker. But if you modify something in the business case, you have to flow that all the way through and set up all the expectations that, okay, we said we were going to do this, we're going to change it, and here's how it impacts this entire project. So that's sort of another thing that you run into. I spoke earlier about a self-assessment, understanding your company and the team. That really has to be very frank and candid and forthright. But that can be really, really difficult with the people on the team when you're saying that you need certain capabilities that don't exist in the company. Because some people may say, well, we're the IT department or we're the product management department and that's what we do. But if they don't have the experience, the skills, the knowledge, whatever it is, to work in this new project, that could be an issue. So you need to do this, but do it in a very non-threatening way and really focus with the staff on how this new opportunity for the business is also a new opportunity for them. A lot of new learning opportunities, maybe opportunities for advancement. And you know, it needs to be really presented in a positive way. And that plays into establishing a culture of innovation. Innovation requires experimentation, requires a lot of open communication. And because it's something new, people will make mistakes and there will be failures. And you have to let everyone know that you, or the business has to let everyone know that that's expected and that people shouldn't be afraid to make a mistake. A lot of people are afraid to make mistakes at work or do something wrong or do something that fails because a lot of people are afraid that that's going to cost them their job or maybe cost them their bonus. And so, again, focusing the staff on the opportunity and the learning, very important. Also aligning the incentives. If people do have bonuses, you need to factor this in and make sure that if you're asking people to work on a new project that's going to drive the future of your company, that doing that is not going to negatively impact their bonus. And very often, you don't have this kind of alignment that flows all the way through. And so just a very big thing to think about as you go through this process. And so what you're doing here really is you're minimizing the fear. You're not only helping people through this, understand what it is, why it's a good thing, why it benefits them, but you're really minimizing that fear factor that would start people to actually try to row in another direction or hold up your project because they think if they do something, it's going to hurt them personally. Questions about that? Yep. Yeah. Okay, great question. So for everyone online, the question was, how do you transition from the old way of thinking to what's new? You do that by keeping people up to date and involved and having everyone be able to play some kind of role, stay informed, keep people updated, give people the opportunity to get involved, give them the opportunity to learn new things. If you have a need for new skills or knowledge, you want to give the staff the opportunity to acquire those. It's terrible for the business if people start leaving because they think that this new thing is going to displace them and they better get out before they're gotten rid of, right, by somebody else who maybe knows about how to do whatever the new thing is. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge and staff that is with the company for a long time, and you really want to keep those people along that whole process. Yeah, and a lot of communication. Yeah, and a lot of learning, training sessions, whatever it takes. There are a lot of things that can be done. Anyone else? Anyone online have any questions on the Zoom? Okay. So there's a ton of literature about strategy and innovation. There are probably lots of footnotes in your textbooks pointing to different books and experts and research papers and things. So I'm recommending this one thing here to you. It's actually two parts. If this group of authors first came out with a paper, research paper called How Serial Innovators Navigate the Fuzzy Front End of New Product Development. And that's some of what I covered here with you, right? How do you navigate that fuzzy front end? How do you make it clear and have a way to move forward? And then they wrote a book that really expanded on that. It went from like 35 pages to 235 pages. And the title of the book is Serial Innovators, How Individuals Create and Deliver Breakthrough Innovations in Mature Firms. And they really expanded on this topic, including how to manage a staff that is doing this kind of work, discovering new opportunities and building new offerings for the market. So this first one, there's a link. It's a PDF. You just go to you click that link, it'll download the PDF from the organization. And the book it might be in the library, and of course, it's definitely on Amazon. So if you want to pursue more, that is a good source for information about that.